I am standing in the silence of my Boston apartment, the only sound being the gentle hiss of steam as I press the crease on my dress uniform sleeve. Razor sharp. Perfect. It is the ritual of a captain who controls her world. Then, the phone on the mahogany table vibrates against the wood, shattering the peace. A text message from an unknown number flashes across the screen, accompanied by a photo of an old man hooked up to machines. The message reads, "Raymond Jenkins wants to see you one last time before he dies." My hand freezes. The hot iron hovers dangerous inches from my skin. My chest tightens, the air in my lungs sucked out as if a hatch has been blown open at 30,000 feet. It is not grief that paralyzes me. It is the name. That name drags a blizzard from 13 years ago back into this warm room, freezing my blood instantly. I look into the mirror. I see Captain Alicia Jenkins, disciplined and hardened. But behind my eyes, I still see the terrified 15-year-old girl pounding on a locked door in the dead of winter. Why should I go back to the man who threw me out like garbage based on a lie? Why give him the dignity of a goodbye? Perhaps it is time to face this final tribunal, not to seek his approval, but to bury the ghost of October 14th, 2011, once and for all. It was October 14th, 2011. I walked through the front door, my lungs still burning pleasantly from a 10-kilometer cross-country run. I was Alicia, the girl who made her bed with military corners every single morning before school. I believed, with the naive stupidity of a child, that if I was perfect enough, if I was disciplined enough, I could earn my father's love. But the moment the door latched behind me, the air in the house felt heavy, thick with the smell of stale Marlboro smoke and suffocating tension. The living room had been tossed. Couch cushions were on the floor. My sister Corinne was curled up on the beige sofa, her face buried in her hands, sobbing with a theatrical intensity that shook her thin shoulders. And there was my father, Raymond. He stood in the center of the chaos like a volcano about to blow its cap. His knuckles were white, clutching a handful of orange plastic prescription bottles. I knew those bottles. Everyone in New Hampshire knew those bottles. OxyContin. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw absolutely no recognition in his eyes. Just pure, unadulterated disgust. "How do you explain this, you piece of trash?" Raymond hurled the bottles at me. The hard plastic projectiles struck my collarbone, stinging sharply against my sweaty skin before clattering onto the hardwood floor. "Trent's pills?" I stammered, confused. "Why were they in your sock drawer, Alicia?" My blood ran cold. I had never touched a drug in my life. I looked at Corinne. She lifted her head from her hands. Her eyes were red and puffy, a masterpiece of sorrow. But as she looked at me, the corner of her mouth twitched upward. A micro-expression, a smirk. "I'm so sorry, Alicia," she wailed, her voice cracking perfectly. "I couldn't hide it for you anymore. I didn't want you to die of an overdose like those kids on the news." She was stabbing me in the back while dressed as my savior. It was a performance so grotesque, so evil, that I couldn't even speak. She had planted them. She needed a scapegoat, and I was the sacrifice. "Dad, please," I choked out, finding my voice. "I just got back from practice. Check my training log. Check with Coach Miller." "Shut your mouth!" His scream shook the framed photos on the walls. "I do not want to hear another lie from that dirty mouth of yours. You are just like your mother, always acting so high and mighty, so disciplined, but rotting from the inside out." He dragged my dead mother into it. That was the lowest blow. He didn't want the truth. He wanted a target. He wanted to feel righteous. I looked toward the kitchen. My stepmother, Jolene, was leaning against the refrigerator. She was holding a steaming mug of Swiss Miss cocoa, blowing gently on the marshmallows. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Raymond. She just stared at the small television on the counter, watching a reality show about housewives in New Jersey. She took a sip, completely indifferent to the execution happening 10 feet away. Raymond lunged forward. He grabbed the collar of my varsity jacket, his grip bruising my neck, and dragged me toward the front door like a bag of yard waste. I scrambled, my sneakers squeaking on the floor, trying to grab the door frame. "Dad, it's freezing!" There is a storm warning. I don't have a coat. Get out of my house. I will not raise a junkie under this roof. He opened the heavy oak door and shoved. I stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold, and landed hard on the freezing concrete of the porch. He grabbed my school backpack from the floor and threw it at me. It hit me in the chest, knocking the wind out of me. Don't come back, he spat. The door slammed shut with a violence that rattled the windows. Then came the sound that would haunt my nightmares for a decade, the loud metallic click-clack of the deadbolt sliding into place. A second later, the porch light flickered and died. If that sound of the lock clicking shut makes your blood boil, please hit the like button to show Alicia the support her father refused to give. And if you would have opened your door to this innocent girl on a freezing night, just comment, yes, below. Let's show her that there is still warmth left in this world. I was 15 years old. In the span of 10 minutes, I had lost my honor, my home, and my family. I stood up, shivering as the freezing rain began to mix with snow. The darkness of the New Hampshire night swallowed me whole. The October chill in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, is not a weather event. It is a weapon. Standing on that porch, staring at the darkened wood of the door that had just slammed shut, I felt the wind cut through my thin polyester tracksuit like thousands of invisible razor blades. I was wearing nothing but my team uniform, a flimsy windbreaker, and running shorts. For the first 5 minutes, I was a child. I pounded on the oak door until my knuckles were raw and bloody. I screamed for my father. I begged him to open the lock, promising I would be quiet, promising I would be invisible. But the house remained silent, a tomb of warmth that I was no longer permitted to enter. The windows were dark eyes, unblinking and indifferent. Then the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. No one is coming. If I stayed on this concrete slab, I would freeze to death before sunrise. Maybe that was what Corinne wanted. A tragic accident to complete her narrative. I turned around and faced the driveway. My only hope was Grandma Dorothy's house. I mapped the coordinates in my head like a soldier studying a battlefield. 7 miles. Under normal conditions, 7 miles was a warm-up run. But tonight, in a developing nor'easter, 7 miles was a death sentence. It stretched out before me like 700 miles of hostile desert, only white and freezing. I began to move. I reached the shoulder of Route 9. The shoulder was narrow, cluttered with frozen debris and slush. The rain had turned into sleet, hard pellets of ice that stung my face like buckshot. Traffic was sparse, but every pair of headlights blinded me. About a mile in, a massive silver SUV roared up behind me. I tried to step further into the breakdown lane, but I wasn't fast enough. The heavy tires hit a deep pothole filled with freezing sludge and road salt. A wave of brown, oily water exploded over me, drenching me from head to toe. I gasped, the shock of the freezing liquid nearly stopping my heart. The taste of road salt and gasoline filled my mouth, briny and toxic. Through the rain-streaked passenger window of the SUV, time seemed to slow down for a second. I saw the interior light on. I saw a family. A mother and father in the front, laughing. 2 kids in the back seat, wrestling over a box of pepperoni pizza. The image seared itself into my retinas. They were warm, they were full, they were loved. The contrast tore a hole in my chest wider than the cold ever could. Why did they deserve that warmth while I was discarded like roadkill? Where was God? Was he sitting in that SUV, eating pizza, laughing at the girl shivering in the mud? Tears welled up in my eyes, hot and stinging, but the wind froze them against my cheeks before they could even roll down. I kept walking. I had to. By the 4th mile, my legs no longer belonged to me. My sneakers were sodden blocks of ice, weighing 5 pounds each. My feet were just numb stumps striking the pavement. My body entered the first violent stage of hypothermia. I was shaking so hard my teeth clacked together, a rhythm I couldn't control. My mind began to fracture. I needed to escape the pain, so I retreated into the one place where I felt safe, the military discipline I had read about in books. I stopped being Alicia, the rejected daughter. I became a recruit. Callous your mind, I told myself, channeling the voice of a drill sergeant. Pain is just information. You are not weak. You are a machine. Left foot, right foot. Do not stop, Jenkins. I hallucinated that this was a selection course for the special forces. If I stopped, I failed. If I sat down, I rang the bell. I forced my brain to ignore the screaming signals from my nerve endings. I visualized a fire in my chest, a small stubborn flame that Raymond and Corinne could not extinguish. I marched to the rhythm of my own shivering. Mile 5. The shivering stopped. This was the danger zone. I knew enough biology to know that when the body stops fighting the cold, the end is near. The violent shaking was replaced by a strange, seductive calm. A wave of heat seemed to wash over me, starting from my core and spreading to my limbs. It felt wonderful. It felt like sinking into a hot bath. My brain was lying to me. It was the final dump of energy before the systems shut down. The world began to tilt. The headlights of passing cars smeared into long, streaky ribbons of light, like ghostly fireflies dancing in the sleet. My coordination vanished. I tried to lift my left foot, but it caught on a root or a rock. Just a little further. I whispered, but no sound came out. My throat was frozen shut. Gravity took over. I pitched forward, tumbling off the shoulder of the road and crashing into a drainage ditch filled with dead weeds and snow. The impact was soft, almost gentle. The snow felt like a down comforter. I tried to push myself up, but my arms refused to obey. The darkness of the ditch rose up to meet me. The sleet covered me, a white shroud weaving itself over my body. I wasn't afraid of dying. In that final moment of consciousness, as the blackness swallowed the last of the light, I felt only a bitter, crushing defeat. So this is it, I thought. Corinne won. If angels exist, they do not drive chariots of fire. They drive battered 2004 Ford Tauruses with rust on the wheel wells. Gloria Hensley was 62 years old. She was driving home after a double shift, her eyes scanning the dark, slick asphalt of Route 9 out of habit. 35 years as a social worker for Child Protective Services had given her what we in the military call situational awareness. Where other drivers saw only shadows and slush, Gloria saw anomalies. She saw a shape in the drainage ditch that did not belong. A bundle of dark fabric half buried in the accumulating snow. Most people would have kept driving. The storm was intensifying, turning the world into a blur of gray and white. But Gloria slammed on her brakes. Her tires skidded on the black ice, screeching in protest before coming to a halt on the narrow shoulder. She did not hesitate. She threw her door open and scrambled down into the freezing ditch, her boots sinking into the mud. When she rolled me over, my face was the color of a bruise. My lips were blue, bordering on violet. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice lost in the howling wind. "You are just a baby." She did not scream. She did not panic. She went into work mode. She stripped off her own heavy wool coat and wrapped it around my rigid body. She pressed 2 fingers to my carotid artery, searching for the rhythm of life. It was there, thready, erratic, and dangerously slow. But it was there. Gloria hooked her arms under my shoulders and dragged me out of the ditch. I was dead weight, my limbs locked in the paralysis of severe hypothermia. She muscled me into the backseat of her Ford, cranking the heater vents until the old engine roared. She dialed 911. "Dispatch, this is Gloria Hensley, badge number 419. I have a code red on Route 9, mile marker 12. Juvenile female, unresponsive, suspected stage 3 hypothermia. I am starting CPR protocols if she arrests." She hung up and climbed into the back seat with me. She began to rub my arms and legs vigorously, trying to force blood back to my core. The heat of the car began to thaw the outer layers of my consciousness, pulling me out of the black void and into a terrifying gray delirium. I didn't know I was safe. In my mind, I was still on the porch. I was still facing Raymond. "I'm sorry, Dad," I mumbled, my teeth chattering so hard the words were shredded. I folded the blankets. 90 degrees. Please." Gloria froze. She had seen battered children. She'd seen starved children, but nothing broke a social worker's heart quite like the sound of a freezing child apologizing for their own existence. Shh, honey, you are safe, Gloria said, her voice trembling. Don't kick me out, I sobbed, eyes squeezed shut, fighting ghosts. I didn't take the money. I will be good. I promise I will be good. Tears streamed down Gloria's face. She pulled me against her chest, rocking me back and forth. Each apology I choked out was an indictment against the man who had put me there. She knew, right then and there, that this was not a runaway case. This was a disposal. The wail of a siren cut through the storm. Blue and red lights washed over the interior of the car, pulsing in time with the headache splitting my skull. The EMTs were efficient. They loaded me onto a stretcher, covering me with chemical heat packs. When they tried to close the ambulance doors, Gloria planted her small frame in the way. I am riding with her, she declared. I am asserting temporary emergency guardianship until next of kin is vetted. No one touches this girl without my approval. The paramedic looked at her badge and nodded. Inside the ambulance, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and wet wool. Gloria sat on the bench beside the stretcher. She took my hand that was as cold and hard as stone, and held it between her two warm palms. That sensation was the only thing tethering me to the earth. It was a stark, violent contrast to the last hour of my life. My father had used his hands to throw me into the snow. This stranger was using hers to pull me back from the edge. At Portsmouth Regional Hospital, the trauma team went to work. They cut off my wet clothes and covered me in a bear hugger, a specialized blanket that blows hot air over the body. They pushed warmed saline into my veins. I woke up 2 hours later. The pain of rewarming was excruciating, like my veins were filled with broken glass. I blinked, my vision adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights of the exam room. Sitting in a plastic chair in the corner was Gloria. She was still wearing her blouse, having used her coat to save me. She looked tired, old, and absolutely beautiful. You are back with us, she said softly. I tried to sit up, but my body felt like lead. I looked at her, my mind clearing. The soldier in me took over. I pushed aside the pain and looked her in the eye. My name is Alicia Jenkins, I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. I live at 42 Oak Street. My father is Raymond Jenkins. I know, Gloria said, opening a leather notebook. Her pen hovered over the paper. Tell me everything, Alicia, and do not leave out a single detail. I told her. I gave her the timeline, the run, the pills, the accusation, the lock clicking shut. I reported it with the dry, factual detachment of a witness giving a statement, because if I let myself feel it, I would shatter. Gloria wrote it all down. As she listened, the pity in her eyes evaporated. It was replaced by something harder, colder. It was the look of a woman who had spent 35 years fighting monsters and had just found a new one to hunt. She snapped the notebook shut. Rest now, Alicia, she said, her voice like steel wrapped in velvet. You focus on getting warm. I will handle the rest. This was not an accident. This was a crime. The police had called Raymond. I expected him to arrive with his head hung low, perhaps even with a flicker of fatherly guilt. I was still naive. 1 hour later, Raymond marched into the emergency room, with Corinne trailing behind him like a shadowed ghost. He didn't rush to my bedside. He didn't look at the heart monitor beeping steadily beside my head. He didn't touch my hand. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest. His face flushed not with worry, but with embarrassment. What have you done now, Alicia? He hissed, his voice dripping with venom. Do you have any idea what time it is? Do you know how much an ambulance ride costs? My insurance deductible is $5,000. Are you trying to bankrupt me? He turned to the police officer standing by the wall. Officer, I apologize. The girl is a runaway. She has a drug problem. I was trying to discipline her, and she pulled this stunt to get attention. She's a manipulative little liar. Corinne stood behind him, head bowed, playing the part of the traumatized sister perfectly. She wore a rosary around her neck that I had never seen before, but I watched her hands. They were trembling, not from grief, but from frantic activity. Her thumbs were flying over the screen of her iPhone, likely deleting every text message she had sent to Trent Barlow in the last 48 hours. The air in the small hospital room grew thick with the stench of their audacity. Raymond wasn't worried that his 15-year-old daughter had almost frozen to death. He was worried about his bank account and what the neighbors would say at the grocery store tomorrow. Gloria Hensley stood up. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall, a retired social worker in a wrinkled blouse. Raymond was 6 feet tall and built like a linebacker. But when Gloria stepped between us, she looked like a giant. "Mr. Jenkins," Gloria said, her voice eerily calm. "Your daughter arrived here with a core body temperature of 90 degrees. She has bruises on her collarbone consistent with blunt force trauma. Her toxicology screen is clean. No drugs, no alcohol, just exhaustion and starvation." Raymond scoffed. "You don't know her like I do." Gloria held up her leather notebook. "I know the law, Mr. Jenkins. Under New Hampshire statutes, ejecting a minor from the home during a weather emergency constitutes criminal neglect. I am a mandated reporter. I have already filed a report with Child Protective Services. This is no longer a family dispute. It is an active investigation." For the first time, the color drained from Raymond's face. He wasn't afraid of me dying. He was afraid of a felony charge. He opened his mouth to bluster, to intimidate, to lie. Then, the door to the room swung open again. Thud, thud, thud. The rhythmic sound of a heavy cane striking the linoleum floor silenced the room. My grandmother, Dorothy Reeves, walked in. She was 70 years old, the widow of a Marine Corps colonel. She wore a wool coat buttoned to the chin, and her silver hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She didn't look at me. Her steel-gray eyes were locked on Raymond like a sniper acquiring a target. "Mother Reeves," Raymond stammered, stepping back. "I can explain." Dorothy didn't stop walking until she was 6 inches from his face. She shifted her weight to her left leg. Crack! The sound of her open palm striking Raymond's face was loud enough to make the police officer jump. It wasn't a slap. It was an execution of dignity. Raymond's head snapped to the side. A red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek. "You are a disgrace to this bloodline, Raymond," Dorothy said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "You threw my granddaughter out into a nor'easter like she was a stray dog?" She stole," Raymond whined, clutching his cheek like a petulant child. "She's an addict, Dorothy. Corinne found the pills." Dorothy turned her gaze to Corinne. My sister shrank back against the wall, clutching her phone to her chest. "And you," Dorothy said, pointing the rubber tip of her cane at Corinne's chest. "Don't think I am a senile old woman. I know exactly what you are doing. I spoke to the bank this morning. I hired a private forensic accountant to look at the family trust." Corinne's face went white. Her fingers went slack and her phone clattered to the floor. "You aren't worried about your sister's health," Dorothy continued, her eyes narrowing. "You are worried about the survivor clause in your mother's will. You spend money you don't have, and now you need Alicia out of the way to cover your debts." The room went deadly silent. Raymond looked from Dorothy to Corinne, confusion clouding his eyes. He was too stupid, too blinded by favoritism to see the viper he was protecting. Dorothy turned to the police officer and Gloria. "I am asserting kinship rights," she declared. "I am petitioning the court for emergency custody effective immediately. Alicia is coming home with me, and if either of these two miserable excuses for human beings comes within 500 feet of my house, I will shoot them." And in New Hampshire, gentlemen, that is entirely legal. If that slap from Grandma Dorothy felt like justice to you, please hit the like button right now. And tell me in the comments, would you have slapped him once, or would you have kept going? Type Team Grandma if you are on her side. That night, I was transferred to a private room before being discharged to Dorothy's care. As the nurse wheeled me out, I looked back one last time. Raymond was sitting in a plastic chair, head in his hands, utterly defeated. Not by love, but by force. The war for my life had officially begun, and for the first time, I had an army. The dining room at Grandma Dorothy's house did not smell like stale smoke or secrets. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The heavy mahogany table, usually reserved for Thanksgiving dinners, had been transformed into a command center. Stacks of documents were arranged in precise piles, weighing down the lace tablecloth. The air was heavy, not with tension, but with the cold, sterile gravity of truth. Grandma Dorothy sat at the head of the table, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Beside her sat Mr. Henderson, the family attorney, a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. "Sit down, Alicia," Dorothy said, gesturing to a chair. "We need to talk about your mother's will." I sat. The mention of my mother always made my chest ache, but I pushed the feeling down. "Your mother left a small inheritance," Dorothy explained, tapping a thick yellowed document. "She set up an educational trust fund for both you and Corinne. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to start a life, $45,000 each. The money was set to be released to you on your 18th birthday. $45,000. To a 15-year-old girl who had just been thrown out of her house with nothing but a backpack. That sounded like millions. However, Mr. Henderson interjected, his voice dry as dust, there is a stipulation. A protective clause intended to keep the money safe. He slid the paper toward me, pointing a manicured finger at a paragraph of fine print. "Read this." I leaned in. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was clear enough. In the event that the beneficiary is declared mentally incapacitated, suffers from proven substance abuse issues, or is incarcerated in a correctional facility prior to the age of 21, control of the assets shall transfer immediately to the successor guardian. "Who is the successor guardian?" I asked, though a cold knot was already forming in my stomach. Dorothy flipped the page. There, signed in my father's looping, lazy handwriting, was the update he had filed just 6 months ago. He had relinquished his financial oversight duties because he couldn't be bothered with the paperwork. Successor guardian, Corinne Jenkins. I stared at the name. The room seemed to tilt. "It was a trap," I whispered. "It was a heist," Dorothy corrected, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Corinne didn't just want you out of the house because she hated you, Alicia. She needed you to be labeled a drug addict. She needed you to be arrested. If the police had found those pills on you, or if you had been sent to the juvenile detention center, you would have been disqualified from the trust. And she would have gained control of your $45,000, Mr. Henderson finished. "But why?" I asked. "Corinne has her own trust fund. Why would she destroy my life for money she doesn't need?" Dorothy signaled to the lawyer. He opened a second folder. This one was red. He spread a series of credit card statements across the table like a fan of playing cards. "Because, my dear," Dorothy said, "your sister is broke." I looked at the statements. They were an autopsy of a fake life. Corinne Jenkins was 19 years old. She was a college dropout living at home, but if you looked at her Instagram, she was a socialite. The statements were a roadmap of narcissism. $3,000 for a designer handbag. $500 for a VIP table at a club in Boston. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. And then there were the cash withdrawals. Massive ones. She is funding Trent Barlow, I realized. Trent was her boyfriend, a 24-year-old entrepreneur who spent his days talking about penny stocks and cryptocurrency schemes while driving a leased BMW he couldn't afford. "She has burned through her entire trust fund," Mr. Henderson said. "And she has maxed out 3 credit cards in your father's name. But this is the clincher." He pointed to a letter from a collection agency. "She owes $18,000 to a predatory lender, high-interest personal loan. The final demand notice is dated October 1st. The deadline for payment is October 31st. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with a sickening click. Halloween. The deadline was Halloween. Corinne was drowning. She had built a castle of lies on social media, the perfect clothes, the perfect boyfriend, the perfect life, and the bill had finally come due. She was terrified of being exposed as a fraud. She needed a cash injection, and she needed it fast. She didn't see me as her little sister. She saw me as a piggy bank she could smash open. I thought back to the night of the ambush. I remembered Corinne's tears. I remembered how she had found the pills. It wasn't an act of passion. It was a calculated business move. She had bought the empty OxyContin bottles from Trent. She had staged the room. She had manipulated our father's temper and his laziness, knowing he would never bother to drug test me or check the facts. If Gloria hadn't stopped her car that night, A chill that had nothing to do with the winter storm went down my spine. She didn't care if I died, I said, my voice hollow. If I had frozen to death in that ditch, the money would have gone to her as the sole surviving heir. If I had gone to jail, the money would have gone to her as the guardian. She tried to kill you, Alicia, Dorothy said, her hand gripping her cane until her knuckles turned white. Maybe not with a gun, but with the weather and the law. She rolled the dice on your life to pay for a boyfriend and a handbag. I looked down at my hands. They were still scarred from the frostbite, the skin slightly discolored. I'd always thought monsters were scary beasts hiding under the bed. I didn't know the most dangerous monster was the girl who slept in the room next to mine, the girl who stole my mother's necklace years ago and blamed the housekeeper. Corinne wasn't just mean, she was a vulture. And she had been circling me, waiting for me to fall so she could pick my bones clean. We have the motive, I said, looking up at my grandmother. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, hard resolve. Now we just need to prove she planted the pills. Dorothy smiled, a grim, dangerous smile. That is exactly what we are going to do. Maria Santos was not the kind of social worker who wore knitted cardigans and offered you a tissue while asking how you felt. She was a weapon in a blazer. Appointed by the court to advocate for my best interests, she operated less like a bureaucrat and more like a federal agent hunting a domestic terrorist. 3 days after I was discharged to Grandma Dorothy's house, Maria sat at our dining room table. She opened a thick, military-grade laptop and looked at me with dark, intelligent eyes. Emotions are the enemy of the truth, Alicia, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Your father is an emotional man. He runs on anger and pride. We are not going to argue with him. We are going to bury him with data. She spun the laptop around. In God we trust, she quoted, a dry smile touching her lips. All others must bring data. On the screen was a timeline of October 14th. It was a forensic reconstruction of the day my life ended. According to the police report, Corinne had filed an act of supreme arrogance. She claimed she had caught me buying drugs from a dealer behind the gymnasium at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. She claimed I had stolen $800 from Raymond's wallet to pay for them. That is her story, Maria said. Now let's look at physics. She clicked a file. A grainy black and white video feed filled the screen. It was time-stamped footage from the security camera in my high school's science wing. Time, 2:47 in the afternoon, Maria narrated. There I was. I was sitting in the second row of Mr. Henderson's chemistry honors class. I was holding a test tube, laughing at something my lab partner said. The digital attendance log next to the video confirmed my presence. I was physically, undeniably, in class. Maria opened a second window. Time, 2:47 in the afternoon. This footage was from a drive-through ATM at a Bank of America 12 miles away from the high school. A silver sedan pulled up. The driver was wearing a pink hoodie and oversized sunglasses, trying to hide her face. She leaned out to withdraw cash. $800. Look at the wrist, Maria commanded, zooming in. The resolution was grainy, but the detail was unmistakable. As the driver reached for the cash, her sleeve rode up. There, inked on the inside of her wrist, was a small, black butterfly. Corinne's butterfly. Unless you have the ability to teleport 12 miles in 0 seconds and grew a tattoo overnight, Maria said, leaning back. Corinne's story is physically impossible. She stole the money. She framed you. But Maria wasn't finished. She pulled a plastic evidence bag out of her briefcase. Inside was a cheap, black prepaid phone. The burner phone Raymond had found in my room, filled with texts arranging drug deals. Amateurs make mistakes, Maria said, tapping the bag. Corinne thought because this phone was prepaid, it was untraceable. She forgot that she had to buy it somewhere. Maria pulled up a credit card statement on the screen. It was Corinne's Visa bill. October 12th, Cumberland Farms Convenience Store. $19.99. The exact price of a TracFone Model Z2. I stared at the screen, stunned by the sheer stupidity of it. Corinne was so confident in her ability to manipulate our father that she hadn't even bothered to use cash. She had used her own credit card to purchase the weapon she used to assassinate my character. She left a digital footprint the size of a dinosaur, Maria said, closing the laptop with a satisfying snap. We have her, Alicia. We have her on theft, filing a false police report, and fraud. That afternoon, Grandma Dorothy drove to my father's house. I sat in the passenger seat of her Buick, the engine idling. I refused to get out. I watched through the window as Dorothy marched up the walkway, a thick manila envelope in her hand. Raymond opened the door. He looked older, tired, his shirt unbuttoned and stained. He didn't invite her in. I watched as Dorothy pulled out the photos. The still frame of me in chemistry class, the photo of Corinne at the ATM with the butterfly tattoo clearly visible, the credit card receipt. She shoved them into his chest. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the body language. Raymond looked at the photos. He stared at them for a long time. Then, he did something that broke the last fragile thread connecting us. He threw the photos onto the porch floor. He waved his hands dismissively, his face twisting into a scowl. He shouted something at Dorothy. I could read his lips through the windshield. Fake. He pointed at the house behind him, where Corinne was undoubtedly hiding. He mimed eating. He mimed sleeping. He was telling Dorothy that Corinne was taking care of him, cooking for him, being a good daughter. He pointed at the car, at me. He spat on the ground. He says it is Photoshop, Dorothy said when she got back into the car, her voice trembling with rage. He says you and that communist social worker manufactured the video. He says he knows his Corinne, and she would never steal from him. I looked at the man standing on the porch, kicking the evidence of my innocence into the bushes. He wasn't confused. He wasn't senile. He was choosing the lie. The lie was comfortable. The lie meant he didn't have to admit he was a monster who threw his child into a storm. He would rather lose me forever than lose his ego for a moment. I didn't cry. I felt a strange, cold click in my chest, like a breaker switch tripping to the off position. Let's go, Grandma, I said, staring straight ahead. The man in that house is dead. Dorothy put the car in gear. As we pulled away, I didn't look back. Raymond thought he had won by denying the truth. He didn't know that his denial had just armed us for a war he couldn't possibly understand. And we had one more weapon he didn't know about. A witness who was about to trade his silence for freedom. By March of 2012, the snow in New Hampshire had turned to gray slush, but inside the Rockingham County Family Court, the air was dry and hot. I sat next to Grandma Dorothy. Across the aisle sat Raymond and Corinne. Or rather, a version of Corinne I had never seen before. Gone were the designer clothes, the heavy eyeliner, and the arrogance. Today, she was playing the role of the martyr. She wore a faded white dress that looked like something from a thrift store, high-necked and modest. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup. In her hands, she clutched a set of wooden rosary beads, her fingers working over them as if she were praying for salvation. She took the stand. Her voice was a fragile whisper, perfectly calibrated to break hearts. Your Honor, she said, wiping a single photogenic tear from her cheek. I only wanted what was best for Alicia. I tried to help her detox at home. I don't know why she would invent these terrible lies about me. I love my little sister. From the bench behind her, Raymond nodded vigorously. He looked at the judge with pleading eyes, silently begging her to see what he saw. A saintly daughter being persecuted by a rebellious one. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. If we hadn't had Maria Santos, Corinne might have walked out of there with a medal. Grandma Dorothy's lawyer, Mr. Henderson, stood up. He didn't cross-examine Corinne. He simply turned to the back of the room. Your Honor, the plaintiff calls a rebuttal witness, Mr. Trent Barlow. The heavy double doors swung open. The air in the room shifted instantly. Trent Barlow shuffled in. He wasn't wearing his leased BMW suit. He was wearing a bright orange jumpsuit issued by the Department of Corrections. His wrists were bound by steel handcuffs, linked to a chain around his waist. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. Corinne stopped crying. Her face drained of color, turning the shade of old parchment. Trent had been arrested by the FBI the previous week for wire fraud. Facing 10 years in federal prison, he had been eager to cut a deal. He sat in the witness box, looked at Corinne, and gave a cold, humorless smirk. "Sorry, babe," he said into the microphone. "I'm not doing hard time for you." Under oath, Trent sang like a bird. He detailed everything. "She bought the empty bottles from me for $50, Trent testified, his voice bored. "She staged the room while Alicia was at track practice. She practiced forging Raymond's signature on the trust fund documents for weeks. I watched her do it." "And did she state a motive?" Mr. Henderson asked. "Yeah," Trent said, leaning back. "She said, and I quote, 'As soon as we get rid of the brat, the money is ours. We can pay off the loan sharks and go to Cabo.'" Raymond sat frozen, his mouth hung open. He looked from the criminal on the stand to the girl in the white dress holding the rosary. The cognitive dissonance that had protected him for months finally shattered. The good daughter he had defended was not a saint. She was a co-conspirator. Judge Patricia Morrison had heard enough. She was a woman of steel, with 20 years on the bench and zero tolerance for nonsense. She peered over her spectacles at the defense table. "Stand up," she commanded. Raymond and Corinne stood up. Corinne was trembling now, and it wasn't acting. "Mr. Jenkins," Judge Morrison said, her voice booming without the need for a microphone. "You have not only failed as a father, you have failed as a rational human being. You allowed a viper to nest in your home, and you threw your innocent child to the wolves to protect your own ego." She brought her gavel down. Bang! "I am stripping you of all parental rights, effective immediately. Full legal and physical custody is awarded to Dorothy Reeves. Furthermore, based on the testimony heard today, I am issuing a bench warrant for Corinne Jenkins for fraud, larceny, and child endangerment." "Bailiff," she snapped, "take her into custody." Two uniformed officers moved in. They grabbed Corinne's arms. The rosary beads snapped, scattering across the wooden floor like hail. And then, the mask fell off completely. "Get off me!" Corinne screamed, her face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She thrashed against the officers. "You little bitch, Alicia, I will kill you. That money was mine. It was mine." She was dragged out of the courtroom, screaming profanities that made the stenographer flinch. The saint was gone. Only the monster remained. If seeing that mask slip and justice finally being served gave you goosebumps, smash that like button right now. And tell me in the comments, what is one word you would say to Corinne as she gets dragged away? Type it below. Let's see what you really think of her. The courtroom fell silent. Raymond collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. He looked up at me, his eyes red and wet, filled with a pathetic, begging desperation. He wanted me to come to him. He wanted me to say it was okay. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my blouse. I looked at the man who had been my father, and I felt nothing. No hate, no anger, just the distant pity a soldier feels for a defeated enemy who surrendered too late. I didn't say a word. I turned my back on him. I took Grandma Dorothy's arm, and together we walked down the center aisle. The double doors opened, and the bright, clean light of a New Hampshire spring flooded in. I stepped into the sun, finally free. October 2024. 13 years have passed since the night the door slammed shut and the porch light went out. The terrified 15-year-old girl who walked 7 miles through a blizzard is gone. In her place stands Captain Alicia Jenkins, Logistics Commander for the 10th Mountain Division. The United States Army gave me what Raymond never could, a code of conduct that actually meant something. They taught me that respect is earned through action, not demanded through fear. They gave me a family that would never leave a comrade behind in the snow. I took the obsessive discipline that my father used to mock, the military corners on the bedsheets, the pristine organization, and I turned it into a weapon. I thought about my graduation from West Point. The parade field was a sea of gray and white. Cadets were throwing their covers into the air, screaming with joy as they were engulfed by proud parents. I stood alone on the periphery. My only family was Grandma Dorothy, sitting in her wheelchair, her hands trembling with Parkinson's, but her back as straight as a rod. She couldn't pin my bars on my shoulders, so I did it myself. "You are made of steel, Alicia," she had whispered. She passed away last year. She died peacefully in her sleep, knowing that her little private had become a commander. Back in the present, I stood in the kitchen of my brownstone apartment in Boston. The air smelled of sautéing garlic and rosemary. Colin, my fiancé, was at the counter opening a bottle of Merlot. Colin was a former combat medic who had seen the worst of humanity in Syria. He had scars too, though his were mostly on the inside. I reached for a serving platter on the top shelf. My fingers slipped. Crash! The ceramic platter hit the tile floor, exploding into 100 sharp shards. Instantly, I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I shrank back against the cabinets, my breath hitching. I waited for the yelling. I waited to be called clumsy, stupid, worthless. I waited for Raymond's voice. "Hey, hey," Colin said. His voice wasn't angry, it was soft. He stepped over the broken porcelain, ignoring the mess, and took my hands. He saw the panic in my eyes, the PTSD of a child who was never allowed to make a mistake. "It's just a plate, Alicia," he said, rubbing his thumbs over my knuckles. "We can buy another one. Or we can glue it back together with gold lacquer." "Kintsugi," I whispered, the Japanese art he had told me about. "Exactly," he smiled. "The cracks make it more valuable. You aren't broken, Captain. You are just mended with gold." For the first time in my life, I understood what a home was. A home wasn't a place where you held your breath. A home was a place where it was safe to break things. Then, the phone on the wall rang. The landline. We only kept it for emergencies. I picked it up. "Hello? Captain Jenkins?" The voice was tinny and smelled of antiseptic. "This is the charge nurse at Portsmouth Senior Care. We are calling regarding your father, Raymond Jenkins." The warmth of the kitchen evaporated. "He suffered a massive stroke this morning," the nurse continued. "It is his second one. The prognosis is terminal. He has been drifting in and out of consciousness, but he keeps calling your name." I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from the shock of the past invading my present. Colin turned off the stove. "You don't have to go," he said. "He forfeited the right to see you 13 years ago." "I know," I said. "But I'm not going for him. I'm going for me." I went to the bedroom and opened the garment bag. I pulled out my army service uniform, the dress blues. I put on the shirt, fastening the buttons with steady fingers. I pinned my rack of ribbons to my chest. I checked my reflection. I wasn't dressing up to impress him. I was putting on my armor. I wanted him to see exactly what kind of trash he had thrown away. The drive north to Portsmouth was surreal. The autumn leaves were burning red and orange, just like they had been that day. Before going to the nursing home, I made a detour. I drove past 42 Oak Street. The house was unrecognizable. The lawn where I used to cut the grass with scissors to make it perfect was now a jungle of waist-high weeds. The paint was peeling in long gray strips like dead skin. A foreclosure sign was staked crookedly in the yard. Corinne had destroyed it all. Without me to be the scapegoat and the servant, the rot at the center of the family had spread until the foundation collapsed. I looked at the ruin of my childhood and felt a profound sense of release. A house built on lies cannot stand against the storm. But I was still standing. I put the car in gear and drove toward the nursing home. It was time to execute the final order. Room 302 smelled of industrial pine sol, boiled cabbage, and the unmistakable metallic tang of dying. It was the scent of a state-funded Medicaid nursing home, a place where people were stored when they had nowhere else to go. I stood in the doorway, my polished dress shoes squeaking faintly on the linoleum. The man in the bed bore no resemblance to the terrifying volcano who had thrown me out into a blizzard 13 years ago. The Raymond Jenkins of my nightmares was a giant, fueled by rage and Marlboro Reds. The man before me was a skeleton draped in papery, translucent skin. He was hooked up to a forest of tubes and wires, the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the heart monitor, the only thing proving he was still alive. He opened his eyes. They were milky and sunken, swimming in a pool of yellow jaundice. It took him a moment to focus on the figure standing at the foot of his bed. He took in the midnight blue uniform, the gold braid, the rows of ribbons on my chest. His eyes widened, filling with sudden tears. Alicia. The sound was like dry leaves scraping across pavement. He tried to reach out, but his hand barely lifted off the sheet before falling back. You! He wheezed, fighting for air. You look just like your mother. He turned his head away, unable to hold my gaze. The arrogance was gone. The pride that had destroyed our family had been eaten away by sickness and solitude, leaving only a naked, shivering shame. I walked to the side of the bed. I didn't sit down. I stood at attention, a habit I couldn't break. Why did you call me Raymond? I asked. My voice was cool, steady. I wasn't shaking. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking. Corinne. She was here, last week. The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Even on his deathbed, we couldn't escape her. She came for money? I asked, knowing the answer. She said she was in trouble, Raymond rasped. She owes money to bad people. Again. She tried to make me sign a paper. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that shook his frail frame. She wanted me to transfer my burial insurance policy to her. It is only $5,000, Alicia. It is all I have left to put me in the ground, and she tried to steal it. I felt a surge of disgust so potent it almost made me gag. Corinne wasn't just a vulture, she was a parasite that would feed on its host until there was nothing left but bone. I kicked her out, Raymond whispered, fresh tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. I finally saw her. I saw what she is, but it was too late. He shifted painfully, his hand fumbling under his thin pillow. He pulled out a small tarnished object and held it out to me with a trembling hand. I looked down. It was a medal. Cheap gold-painted medal on a frayed red ribbon. My district track and field first-place medal from 9th grade. The one I thought I had lost in the move. The one from the season before he kicked me out. I kept it, he choked out. I hid it because I knew. I knew you were the good one. But I was a coward, Alicia. I was a weak, pathetic coward. It was easier to believe her lies than to protect you. It was easier to be angry than to be a father. He looked at me then, really looked at me, with a desperation that broke my heart. Not for him, but for the waste of it all. Can you ever forgive me? He begged. I looked at the medal in his palm, then up at his dying face. I felt the old anger rising, the urge to scream at him for the cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness. But then I looked at my uniform. I looked at the person I had become. I was strong because he had forced me to be. I reached out and took his hand. His skin was cold, his fingers fragile as bird bones. I forgive you, Raymond, I said softly. His eyes widened in disbelief. I am not doing it because you deserve it, I continued, my voice firm. I am doing it because I refuse to carry your luggage anymore. I am not going to drag this hate into my future. Your mission as a father failed, but my mission as a human being continues. I pressed the medal back into his palm and closed his fingers around it. You keep this, I said. Take it with you, so you remember that you once had a daughter who was made of iron. Raymond closed his eyes. A long, shuddering sigh escaped his lips, as if a 50-pound ruck had just been lifted from his back. The tension left his body, his features smoothed out. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. Thank you, my soldier. I stood there, holding his hand as the rhythm on the monitor began to slow. The beeps grew farther apart, and then, finally, they merged into a single, high-pitched tone. A flat line. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I felt a strange, quiet peace settle over the room, filling the space where the pain used to be. The blizzard of 2011 was finally over. The storm had blown itself out. I gently let go of his hand. I reached up and adjusted my cap, ensuring it was perfectly straight. I looked at him one last time, not with hatred, but with the solemn respect one gives to the dead. Dismissed, I whispered. I turned on my heel and walked out of room 302, leaving the darkness behind me. We buried Raymond Jenkins on a Tuesday in late October. It was one of those rare, perfect New England autumn days where the sky is a piercing, impossible blue and the air smells like wood smoke and dried leaves. The service was small, quiet. There were no weeping masses, no eulogies praising a great man. There was just me, standing tall in my civilian black dress coat. Next to me was Colin, his hand resting steadily on the small of my back. And on the other side stood Gloria Hensley. She was retired now, her hair completely silver, but her eyes were still as sharp as a hawk's. There was a glaring, empty space where a sister should have been. Corinne did not show up. We heard rumors from the grapevine. She was in Nevada, running from gambling debts, or perhaps she was already in a county jail somewhere for passing bad checks. Her absence was the final, silent testament to Raymond's failure. He had spent his life protecting the wrong child, and in the end, she couldn't even be bothered to watch him be lowered into the ground. I stepped forward to the open grave. I held a single white rose. I didn't place it there for the father who had called me trash. I placed it there for the man who had simply provided the biology for my existence. I forgave him, not because he had earned it, but because hating a dead man is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. "Rest in peace, Raymond," I whispered. "I hope you find the clarity in death that you never found in life." A few weeks later, the paperwork for Raymond's meager estate cleared. After the nursing home took their share, there was very little left. Just the payout from that small burial insurance policy he had protected from Corinne. I didn't keep a cent of it. I took that money, added a significant portion of my own savings, and walked into the principal's office at Portsmouth High School. "I want to start a foundation," I told the principal, the Dorothy Reeves Scholarship. We set it up specifically for students in the foster care system or those facing housing insecurity. I wanted to ensure that no child in this town would ever have to walk 7 miles in a blizzard because they had nowhere to go. I wanted to be the safety net that I never had. The inauguration of the scholarship took place in the school auditorium. I stood on the stage, the wooden podium feeling solid under my hands. I looked out at the sea of teenage faces. Some looked bored, some looked tired, but in the back row, I saw them. The kids with the worn-out hoodies, the kids with the guarded eyes, the kids who knew what it felt like to be hungry on a Tuesday night. I didn't give them a speech about how life is fair. I gave them the truth. "Circumstances do not define you," I told them, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "The world will knock you down. Your family might let you down. But you are the architect of your own future. If you want to change your life, start by making your bed. Start with one small act of discipline. Build your fortress brick by brick until no storm can knock it down." When I finished, the applause was polite, but I saw a few of those kids in the back sit up a little straighter. That was enough. That was the mission. After the ceremony, Colin and I drove out to the coast. We parked near the seawall at Northampton Beach. The Atlantic Ocean was churning, gray and white-capped, crashing against the rocks with a primal, rhythmic power. The wind whipped around us, stinging my cheeks, but this time, the cold didn't scare me. It felt bracing. It felt alive. A large American flag on a nearby pole snapped violently in the wind, holding its ground against the gale. I watched it, thinking about the oath I had taken to defend this country. But the biggest war I had ever fought wasn't overseas. It was right here, on these streets, fighting for my own dignity. Colin wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just held me, warm and solid. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back 13 years. I visualized that 15-year-old girl, shivering in the ditch, snow matting her hair, convinced that she was unlovable garbage. I reached out across time and pulled her into a hug. "We made it," I whispered to her in my mind. "You didn't die in the snow. You grew up. You found a man who loves you. You found a purpose. You won." I opened my eyes and looked at the horizon where the gray water met the gray sky. My life began with a betrayal. It was almost ended by a lie. They stripped me of my home, my name, and my warmth. They tried to bury me in the dark and the cold, thinking I would rot. But they made a critical tactical error. They didn't know that I was a seed. The storm that was meant to kill me only watered my roots. The pressure that was meant to crush me only forged me into steel. I am Captain Alicia Jenkins. I am the daughter of the winter, and I am the oak tree that survived the blizzard. And this is my victory. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with one final thought. Throughout my life, I thought my father's rejection was a life sentence, but I realized it was actually a pardon. It set me free to build my own identity. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped by a painful past, please remember, your history is not your destiny. You cannot choose the family you are born into, but you have the absolute power to choose the family you build. Don't wait for an apology that may never come. Forgive them for your sake, not theirs, and use that energy to build a life so undeniable that the past can no longer touch you. You are the architect, not the victim. Now, I want to hear from you. We have all faced winter storms in our lives. Have you ever had to make the hard choice to walk away from a toxic family member to save your own soul? Or perhaps you were the Gloria, the stranger who extended a hand when someone needed it most. Please share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be the exact thing someone else needs to read today to find hope. And if my journey inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let's build this community of survivors together. Until next time, stay strong, keep your head up, and never stop moving forward.